you everyone for joining. And welcome everyone. I would like to extend a sincere thank you to everyone for giving your time to attend this session as part of Ontario Health West sessions regarding models of care. Next slide, please, Helen. I am Shirley Cook, Director of Capacity Access and Flow at Ontario Health West, and it is certainly a pleasure for the Ontario Health West team, including Helen Johnson, lead, and Alexa Attard, Executive Assistant, to be collaboratively hosting with our partners, Jill Knowlton, Director of Long-Term Care, Jarlette Health Services, Julie Wheeler, Director of Senior Services, Region of Waterloo, and Christina DeSantis, Vice President, Improvement and Innovation with Responsive Group. This session is being recorded and will be available on the partners website for future reference for those who are unable to join us today. I would like to remind you that with this setup, participants will need to put any questions through the Q&A module at the bottom of your screen rather than the chat. And Christina will review and respond to these questions and direct them appropriately at the end of the session. Your microphones will be muted and your cameras will be off video just to help with the presentation logistics. This session is scheduled to formally end at 1 o'clock, and we as your hosts will stay within the Zoom meeting until about 1:15, so that if we run a bit over time or if there are questions that we're not able to get to, that will allow an opportunity for us to hopefully address all of the questions. Today is part one of this three-part series about the butterfly approach. Next slide, please, Helen. The part one focus is what is the butterfly approach? The part two, scheduled for November 15th, will focus on the implementation design, and part three on February 2nd will focus on sustainability and scale. The butterfly model is one of several approaches for person-centered care. We are not endorsing any specific approach or method. This forum provides a vehicle to share knowledge and experiences about the value of person-centered care. And now I'm happy to turn the presentation to Jill Knowlton, Director of Long-Term Care with Jarlette Health Services, to begin the presentation.
Thank you, Shirley, and good afternoon to everyone. It's really lovely to have you with us today to talk about something that is been so inspirational and impactful on the lives of our residents, our staff, and our families. So as Shirley referenced, we're doing a three-part series, and we're really going to work very hard today to stay on the what is the butterfly approach. Please join us in part two, or if you've got lots of questions around the how, and then part three around how you sustain and scale across not only your home, but if you're part of a larger organization. So I know that's a little bit hard at times to stay on task. Our speakers are extremely passionate about the butterfly, so we can get carried away and wanting to share lots of information, but we'll try to keep this on task today. We are going to talk specifically about what is butterfly and the approach and the different types of approaches within the model. There is the butterfly model and the butterfly household approach, but also sort of more other flexibility that's built in so that this can work for your organization. We'll also talk about what butterfly looks, feels, and sounds like. A lot of people get stuck on the colors and some of the stuff of life that happens and is part of a butterfly home, but we'll address that specifically, and more importantly, how that environment, how the changes, how the look really allows us to become more person-centered, and the relational changes around emotion-focused care. As Shirley mentioned, we will have some time for Q&A at the end. If you'd like to put your question into the chat, Christina DeSantis will be moderating that for us, and we'll be sure to address your questions at the end of the presentation. Could I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So really person-centered and why bother? I think we all know the numbers. I think we hear about the tsunami, we hear about, hitting the iceberg, all those sorts of things. I think we all understand that. But I think more importantly, the why comes from quality of living. That should really be expanded to include quality of working and quality of relationships with our families. So society has really woken up to the importance of living well, the importance of working well, and the importance of being well and doing well in long-term care. Sometimes you hear long-term care referred to as long-term living now, not long-term care, but long-term living. And we really have to look at how our approaches and how our models, how our culture responds to that. We know generally the public society, if you read any of CARP's, Canadian Association of Retired Persons, any of the Zoomer magazine, any of those sorts of things, people aren't satisfied with what is current in long-term care. I think, interestingly as well, when you look at Ontario, we don't have plane loads or boatloads of folks coming to look at our long-term care offerings in Ontario. We often get on planes and go to other countries to see what they have to offer. We need to do better in long-term care, and we do know equally, I call it the triad, but equally, residents must live well, staff must work well, and families must do well in order for long-term care to be successful. So you've got that huge pressure of that. How do we respond in long-term care? One of the ways that you can do that is through the culture change to the butterfly approach. Next slide, please. Christina, next slide, if you don't mind. Thank you. So this is absolutely my favorite slide. And every time I speak, I insist that this slide be included because people often say, well, the butterfly approach is really responding to folks with dementia. What about other residents? What about younger residents? What about residents with other needs? There is nothing in the butterfly approach that any of us would not want for ourselves or for our loved ones. And really, good dementia care is good care for everyone. I'm fortunate right now to be sitting in a building that's under construction and will open in the mid-November, and it will open as a full butterfly home, 100% in the butterfly approach. And we will be welcoming residents with all sorts of needs and all sorts of ages and stages in their lives. Next slide, please. Julie?
Thanks, Jill. Hi, everybody. I'm Julie Wheeler, the Director of Senior Services with the Region of Waterloo, representing Sunnyside Home. I'm happy to be here today to share our experience along with Jill and Christina. And I wanted to just take a moment and tell you why Sunnyside Home chose the butterfly approach. We started our journey back in January of 2020. And as you can appreciate, a few months later, we're significantly derailed by the global pandemic, but we're very happy to achieve our accreditation as a level 1 in 2022. And then just last week, we had our second audit and are confident that we will be reaccredited. But we had been working on culture change at Sunnyside for many, many years and had tried various models and approaches. We had equipped staff with the tools and the resources and the understanding to help funnel all of those amazing talents that they have into practical strategies to really make that connection between embracing life for the people who live under our roof, as well as connecting with staff and why they came into this work in the first place. We had changed and transformed the spaces and places to be interactive, inviting, and engaging, but it honestly still wasn't enough. Even though our why was crystal clear to us, it still was not meeting the mark that we felt we needed to make in order to fulfill our vision. And so after looking at many models, their benefits and their impact, we realized that we wanted something that brought everything together. And for us, that was the butterfly approach. What we loved about the butterfly approach was that it recognized that living a life where your needs are not met, where you're lonely or bored or without purpose is simply not living. And we wanted long-term care to feel more like home. We wanted to add flexibility, remove the power imbalance that many things that we have in long-term care create. And we really wanted to encourage people to feel like family. Next slide, please.
Very good. Thank you, Julie. It's Christina DeSantis here. A pleasure to be with everyone this afternoon. Thank you for joining. I'm here on behalf of the Responsive Group. I facilitate improvement and innovation across our portfolio of long-term care and retirement homes that we manage. And I'm very pleased and proud to share that we have just undergone accreditation at 3 of our long-term care homes. Like Julie, we look forward to the results, but a very good experience and a huge transformation in those environments. So we're spending a little bit of focus here at the beginning of this What is Butterfly presentation to talk about person-centered care and why bother. And I think it's a really important emphasis we're making, because the motivations, I think, Julie and Jill, that each of our organizations brings to this why are really important to the choice of the model. And I recall I joined Responsive 5 years ago, almost to the day. And I joined an organization that was ready to really understand that the quality of life that we were offering was not what we wanted it to be. If we were the resident in long-term care, the current model is not the balance between clinical and quality that we would like. And even more so, I recall, Jill, early days when you and I discussed, it wasn't just this feeling of unease with the quality of life condition in long-term care. It was an intolerance for it, a really pretty strong feeling of deeply needing to change the feeling, the lived experience 24/7 in the home. And so that's the deep why that has driven us to the place we're at today and that brings us forward on the journey. I think in recent years, we're all more familiar with the HX, the human experience concept in healthcare. A few years ago, it was common to talk about employee experience, customer experience, certainly outside of healthcare. Those acronyms were well used, but now it's really the human experience in healthcare settings. And that's what we're striving for. I feel we really, as a community, are privileged. We inform people's lived experience 24/7, 365 days a year in the end stages of their lives. And our workforce has a natural inclination to care. I like to sum it up in the fact that we are in the business, in the activity of loving. And so we're shy to use those words, but the essence of this model is a deep, loving model, a very relational model. And those are words that we're bringing into our lexicon through the culture change. So a deep understanding that we need to do better for all of us, for our residents, our families, our team members, but also for our funders, the community at large, and a shared sense that, as Jill was saying, you know, in Ontario, not a lot of external parties come to look at our model. We do have a strong regulatory framework in Ontario. And certainly, you know, it's an important one. It informs us, but beyond that, it's our own standards, beyond those regulatory aspects that define the lived experience that we can deliver. So Helen, thank you. Next slide. So I talked about the strong motivation, that intolerance and impatience for the status quo that was a driving motivator for us at Responsive. And we identified the butterfly approach as our preferred approach very early on, early 2019. And the main shift I can share with you on a personal level was that, having visited some butterfly environments and having visited previously many long-term care environments where residents with dementia, affected by dementia, were living, I actually wanted to not leave the butterfly home area. It felt so emotionally fulfilling that going back into any other environment was just didn't cut it for me. And so those aspects around the deep emotional part of the model are going to be brought to life to you by Julie and Jill as we continue in the presentation. But there are also some more scientific aspects that support the butterfly approach as an emotion-based, person-centered care model. It's very much adding that emotion-based word. And there's some literature and some theory here that I'd invite those of you who are interested to spend a few moments listening to. One is a series of conversations, but also a publication by Dr. Stephen Trzeciak. He is an intensive care physician in the US. He coined the term compassionomics. There's a link here that I invite you. It's a 15-minute TED Talk from 2018, and it talks about the benefit of compassion and emotions in the healthcare setting from all angles. From the patient angle, but also from the provider angle, from the healthcare person who's involved. And during COVID, I think many of us became aware of the term moral injury in the workforce, particularly in long-term care. There were some studies done in Canada. I might add that my own sense is that moral injury was in our long-term care workforce even before COVID, well before. And a sense that the current setting, the systematic approach, the institutional approach really precluded that well-being at a provider level. So this type of model, and Stephen talks to it, really assuages burnout and really delivers that work experience that can bring the workforce, our caring workforce, into this space to stay and thrive. There are also aspects of the butterfly approach and an emotion-based model that lean on, forgive the pun, lean on the concepts of lean thinking. And what Butterfly does is it eliminates a lot of the peaks in the day of a flow in long-term care and flattens those peaks. To give you a sense, in long-term care, we've created peaks of our own around breakfast, around the exact timing when morning meds are administered, around rigid lunch schedules, et cetera, et cetera. And anyone who's been exposed to the lean thinking understands that you are creating peak demand for team member participation at those times. With Butterfly, as we deconstruct the time of day and go to a customer-centered flow of the day, you'll see that you are actually able to flatten and reduce the demand of team time throughout the day. And so really reinforcing the paradigm as well that you don't always need more resources. In fact, you don't with the Butterfly approach that we've seen to this point. Thank you, Helen. Next slide. At Responsive, as I mentioned, we felt strongly that the Butterfly was the approach we wanted to adopt, but we did our homework in this regard, and we reviewed the research paper that was published in early 2019. The City of Toronto had commissioned a number of PhDs with backgrounds in social work to look at the different models of person-centered care in Ontario. And that research publication was a very interesting one. It looked at all the models you can see here to the right of the screen, and a couple of interesting conclusions. First of all, in the early pages, it indicates that actually it's hard to compare models because we don't have the measures of person-centeredness. We don't have the KPIs, the indicators that really measure quality and well-being in long-term care. So from the outset, this team felt that they had a difficult mandate in evaluating different models. Having stated that, they indicated really that each operator should look at the various models and determine which one best suits the individual operator. They all have advantages and strengths, and hence it left the reader with this sense of being able to, needing to choose what would be best for the individual operator. Next slide, please, Helen. So with that in mind, and in partnership with the Ontario Long-Term Care Association, during the course of 2019, I participated and we engaged a PhD student to provide us further insights as operators. What are those different criteria that we need to think about when we're approaching these different person-centered models? And so through approximately 5 months of research, we reviewed the models that you can see on the right of the page, and we identified certain aspects that each operator should ask themselves about what is important in making the decision, an informed decision. And so on the next slide, thank you, Helen, what you're seeing here is that we identified that each of those person-centered models sits on a different range in a spectrum of 5 different elements that an operator might wish to choose. The first one is around the outlay, the incremental investments, the financial outlay that each model requires. To the left, models that require just operational investments and monies, and further to the right, those that require capital investment as well. The organization's second criteria needs to be ready to undergo profound change. And so again, as an operator, you would look at yourself, where are you on that organizational readiness for change spectrum? And you would determine which of the models sits in the space that you're at. Also, third element, as an operator, how comfortable are you with approaches in different models based on the academic and research that has gone into each of the models? Some operators are able to adopt models that are more experiential, and others have an inclination to go with more peer-reviewed models. The fourth criteria that an operator would like to look at is that of risk tolerance. You're going to be implementing change with the models. And so if as an operator, you're prepared to embark on on significant changes that might, on the face of it, challenge certain regulations, certain practices that have been long-standing in the space, but that are very feasible and legitimate, then you might position yourself to the right. If you're less so, you would be on the left of this horizontal line. And finally, the environment that you're bringing and that you're considering to implement your model in. What are the physical design aspects of the home? And so we plotted each of the different approaches that you see on the top of this page onto this grid. And in the white paper, if you'd like to access it, those references are available. But for today, we pulled out, where does Butterfly sit? And as an operator, what would you need to be prepared to do if you're embarking on Butterfly? So basically, you would have an operational and some CapEx spend involved as you embark. You definitely would need to be change ready for the culture transformation that's profound. You'd be an operator that is ready to implement a model that is undergoing more and more research, and a portion of which is actually significantly researched academically, and Julie will talk to it later under the form of the quiz, but largely experiential, certainly in 2019 when we were looking at this, and high appetite for change, and finally, some degree of ability to work with your spaces in your home and adapt and transform them to the needs of Butterfly without having to be purpose-built or the small home environments. So with that in mind, thank you, and I'm going to transition to Julie for the next slide.
Thanks, Christina. So getting to the root of it, what is Butterfly? What is the Butterfly approach? The Butterfly approach is a person-centered, emotion-focused model of care, which actually started in the United Kingdom through Meaningful Care Matters, which was formerly known as Dementia Care Matters. And on this slide here, you'll see some links to explore some of the videos related to this approach to care, and we'll make sure that we copy those into the chat for you. Next slide, please. The Butterfly approach builds on the learnings of Tom Kitwood, a pioneer in the field of person-centered care. Many of you may be familiar with Tom's work, and many of the models that support person-centered care refer to or speak to Kitwood's flower model, which represents the 6 essential human needs required for a strong sense of well-being. The exploration of these needs, and most importantly, how to deliver them in the care setting is at the core of the Butterfly learning process. So through a series of learning sessions, team members embark together on a really amazing journey of groundbreaking changes to ultimately bring their whole person to the workplace, to learn about who the resident is as a person, to feel what their lived experience is like, and how to transform the environment into a place that looks and feels like what they would want and how they would want to be treated. The result is a gradual breaking down of the barriers between us and them, between team members, residents, and even families in many situations, and a metamorphosis into the daily life of the home. Next slide, please.
Thank you. So there's different approaches to design within the Butterfly, and I think really what it speaks to is the flexibility. And when Christina was referencing or speaking to the different criteria or aspects that you would want to consider when you're doing your readiness assessment in your organization or in your home, you really want to look at the at what you're capable of and choose a design that meets the needs of your organization or of your home. So in Jarlette, we have homes that are 45 years old. And as I said earlier, I'm sitting in what will be the newest Butterfly home, 100% home, to open in mid-November, where we've had the ability to construct the home and have impact and influence around the design of the home. I don't have that in my home that's 45 years old in Orangeville. However, they are a Butterfly home. So, you know, again, it speaks to flexibility, and you need to decide what's right for your own home and for your organization. So you can generally do the Butterfly approach, where if we just used as an example, a typical 32-bed resident home area, staff members and our family, and they're with the residents, that we focus on outcomes, and we design the environment within those 32 bed home areas to be stress-free. We do that through color, we do that through the stuff of life, we do that through the way we organize our work, and the way we turn our focus more to relationships. Because I can be more intentional in a purpose-built home, we can create Butterfly households. So households really are smaller living areas where you put like groups together. You can match the households. So it's not just sort of a general population. You can be more specific about how you organize residents in a household. And you do that matching to reduce anxiety and stress. Also, it can respond to cultural diversity. You can match cultural groups that way, and that can be very useful as well. And the next slide, please. So the household design, again, we have to be very mindful of funding. We have to be mindful of the cost of construction. We have to be mindful of our staffing inputs so that we have the ability to staff the home safely. So typically you're around 12 to 16 residents in a small domestic household. And when I say a small domestic household, when we manage that environment well, we begin to look more like a natural living environment where we've come from our own homes, where we've got our own unique front doors, where each home area or each household has its own identity. And the reason we do this is because a house works best when people with people who get on. And when we mix people, particularly various stages of folks with various stages of dementia, you can create an explosive brew. And I think many of you can probably reference that in your own experience in your homes. So when we match people's needs, we're able to really give being person homed a real chance. So you're taking away that risk of that toxicity occurring and having people with sort of like capabilities and like needs living together, and staff and families are directed towards supporting those residents to live well. And again, as I said previously, safe, culturally appropriate, and matched. So again, I don't want people to get hung up on, oh, I can't do the household design in my older building or in my new building that I'm doing. It's just not going to work, and feeling like you can't begin to look at this culture change. You absolutely can do sort of more of a general approach, and it works very well. So it's extremely flexible, and you determine where you are in your organization and where you're going to be around design. And again, for those folks who are doing a number of projects at this time, you can do everything from, arranging living environments in very old homes right up to being able to influence design in the new builds that are occurring now. Next slide, please. So what does butterfly really look and feel and sound like? It's very difficult to describe. And I have to say, this is one of the biggest challenges that I have. People say, Jill, what are you doing? I want to know exactly what you're doing. What does it feel like? And what does it look like? When I walk in there, what am I going to see? And I think, from my background, largely a science background, I need to have some really concrete evidence and some concrete data, and I'm looking for hard numbers and hard facts, but that's not what butterfly is. It's a feeling. And when you walk into a butterfly home area, you feel it. And that's difficult for me to say because, again, I don't come from that background. I don't like hearing people say, you're just going to feel it, Jill, but you do. It's quiet, it's controlled, and you see people living well, going about their lives, not artificially being taken to an activity because it's 10 o'clock. The activity of the day is the living of the day. We cut our vegetables because we have to prepare our meals. We have to do our laundry. We might be doing some work outside. We might just be having access and enjoying the natural outdoor areas. We might be playing tennis. We might be playing the piano, because the staff and the residents and their families really form a family unit. It's all about living normally. So we respond with our 5 senses to open access kitchens that encourage domestic living. It's family style dining. That's one of the biggest challenges that I've found in my experience in the number of projects that I've done where we really get stuck is moving over to family style dining, because staff, typically are told, you don't sit down with a resident. It's mealtime. You're busy. You're serving. You don't sit down and have a cup of tea with the resident because you know what? That's stealing. You're stealing that resident's cup of tea. You don't sit down and enjoy your lunch meal because you should be sitting in a staff room somewhere rather than sitting with residents and eating. So this is a real challenge to move over to family style dining, but when you do, it works beautifully. We live, we work, and we are together. It's being butterfly, and a lot of that is through the family style dining. We ensure that our dining tables include our staff. Our staff are encouraged to sit down, have a glass of juice, have a cup of tea, maybe a bowl of soup. Our dining rooms are very colorful, and we encourage a social experience, and we encourage our residents to help one another. So, the food is served family style down the center of the table. I may have more ability to be able to pour my resident beside me a cup of juice, where I'm not able to cut my food, but somebody else at the table is able to do that for me. So it really becomes a social experience. And where Christina referenced sort of lowering those peaks or leveling the peaks, really, if you think about it, breakfast starts, what does the regulation say? Starts at 8, maybe 8:30, but it doesn't say when it has to end. It can go to 10, 10:30. So, we might people start coming in at 8, but it might be 10, 10:30, and we're still reading the newspaper and having another cup of coffee. So it takes that tension and that sort of task and routine approach away, and staff begin to relax and just be with residents. We heighten the color, and I'm going to speak in a minute more to the color. People get really hung up on the color, but the colors mean something, and the sequencing of the color also means something. And we engage the walls in celebrating and telling stories. When you walk into a butterfly home, you see photos on the wall. No different if you came into my own home, you would see my family's photos on the wall. You come in, you see the staff's photos. They're part of the family, but it doesn't say Jill Knowlton, registered nurse or charge nurse. It will say Jill Knowlton, who has grandchildren and likes to garden and likes to swim and all those interesting things about me as a family member in the home area. Next slide, please. So we personalize the bedroom doors, and everybody has a unique door. You can do that in many ways. You can provide those unique doors, or you can work with residents and their families to select those doors. I have done created unique doors for residents from, maybe what their home was in 1945. I've done a Vickers door. I've done a barn door. It's whatever that resident responds to and will recognize, and it's reflective of their life. We fill up the environments with the stuff of life, so personalized to living, not stuff that we think we need for activities, but stuff that's important to that resident. We ask residents and families and staff to be very involved in that process. And where you happen to have a resident, and this does happen, where they don't have a support system around them, they may not have family members, we do that. The staff do that. The family in the home does that for the resident. We have open shelving, and we create small engaging areas in the building. We don't have things in locked cupboards and closed up, because in our own homes, we don't have everything locked up and inaccessible, and we don't have to ask for everything. We want residents to and their family members to be able to naturally access things. We have access to open, natural outdoor areas, and this is really critical. We largely keep people inside. So if you think after November, when the snow flies and it gets cold, it's very difficult for a resident to get outside because they need a staff member to assist them or support them to go outside. You can't naturally go outside. But in a butterfly home, the outdoors is as important as the indoors. So we create those abilities for residents to be able to get outside. And I always say we're Canadians and we're used to the cold. And on a day like today, when it's 27 in Temiskaming, that's a strange thing to say, but we are used to the cold. And so we want to get those boots on. We want to get our coats and hats and mitts on and get outside. And we provide walking routes that provide an anchor for wayfinding. And often the color will do that alone. So next slide, please. So I have the great opportunity of showing you some slides. I think pictures can tell a story and speak volumes. And so we've got a whole assortment of slides here, and I'm so privileged to be able to present these to you. So here's a hallway. This is a typical corridor in long-term care, and there's our beige walls and a shade of brown on the floor. And it's rather, I don't know, that, I mean, it doesn't sort of enlighten you, and it doesn't sort of energize you when you look at that. And when you look down that hallway, to me, it looks like a bowling alley, maybe 2 or 3 bowling alleys. And what is anchoring me? Where do I need to go when I look down that corridor? So that's where we started from. And next slide, please, Ellen. Thank you. We start with a front door. So every home, household or home has its own front door, no different than your own front door. This is just a set of zone doors that are opening into a 32-bed home area. It got transformed into its own front door. In a butterfly home, every home area will have its own front door, so you can recognize where to go. We unlock the doors. The doors might be closed, but they're not locked and they're not coded. And you don't have residents running away, I guess. That was one thing somebody said to me very early on when I started this. Oh my goodness, you're not going to unlock the doors because everybody's going to run away. I've not had a single person run away. People recognize their door and they know where home is. Next slide, please. Once you get into the cross over your front door or cross over the threshold for your front door, you walk into the vestibule. So there's a place to hang your coats and put your bags and your purses and your umbrellas and things like that, and a place to sit down to take your shoes off or take your boots off and put your slippers on. Next slide. And this is a dining room. So you can see we've transformed this into a family style dining. So we didn't invest a lot of money here. We took our 4-person tables and we put them together and we put a tablecloth across them and just added our dining room chairs. We painted our dining room yellow because yellow stimulates appetite, and it's open. So dining rooms are open so that residents and their families can come in and sit down at any time. And next slide. And snacks on the ready. I love this slide. I think Julie's provided this slide from the region of Waterloo. It's brilliant. So we have open access to food 24 hours a day, typically in areas like this that looks like snack areas, so that you know where to go if you want a drink, if you want some yogurt, if you want to sit with your family and have a little bite to eat. You have access to food. You don't have to ask for something. I had a resident in a home say to me at one point, I feel like every meal that I have in my long-term care home is served McDonald's style. I feel like I'm at McDonald's, breakfast, lunch, and supper, because everything is plated and served to me. I don't have any access to get my own snacks to be able to make a cup of tea. Another resident said to me, I get up at 6 o'clock and it is not the staff's fault. She was very careful to say that. They just don't have time to get me my cup of coffee at 6 o'clock. I have to wait till it's 8 o'clock when we go to the dining room, but I'd like my coffee at 8. She can go, or pardon me, at 6. You can head down to the snack area and get your coffee, tea, and whatever else you might like. And the next slide, please. And your own front door. I spoke about that. So this is just an example of some of the door wraps that go on, and everyone is different. So there's a whole variety of them. So if you can't recognize where your room is, you might begin to recognize that you're in the purple section and that you have the blue door, and you'll be able to find your room. And next slide. And this is about creating spaces to be together, creating the importance of those small spaces rather than sort of those large event areas, just for people to be able to come together. This is a resident and his wife, and you can see they're just enjoying a small area in the home. If you look at the plants that are on the plant ladder to the right of your screen, those plants are real. So we have real plants. We don't need artificial, because in my entire career, I've never known anybody to eat the plants and eat the dirt. So again, it's part of bringing the outside in. Next slide. And again, bringing the outside in. Look at the light that's coming into these areas. Look at the flowers. Look at the plants and the things that are on the wall and that are growing. This just makes it more of a home. And again, that natural outdoor approach is so important to not only our mental health, but our ability to live well and our overall general health. And next slide, please. Inviting interaction. Every wall has something on it, whether it's the stuff of life, whether it's something that you can do, that you can touch. And I must say that everything is touchable. There is nothing in a butterfly home that is not touchable. And we're not concerned about people eating things and hiding things and stuffing things in different places. In fact, I would want you to take those flowers off that yellow wall there and take them with you and enjoy them. And you know what? Somebody at some point will put them right back where they are, or we'll put different ones there. That's the joy of being in a butterfly home. The next slide. And here's a staff member. We don't call them staff, we call them family members, playing the piano with a resident and just being together and having that time together. So it's not as structured as, 10 o'clock we go to an activity in the auditorium, and at 11 o'clock we might have hymn sing and a cup of tea. The rhythm of the day is the activity for the day. And this particular resident wants to play the piano, and there's the staff who's a family, we call them family members, responding there with her resident. Next slide. Spaces for meaningful engagement. Again, you've got nurseries, and they're not artificial nurseries. They actually have things that you can touch and take and use. I know in certain homes, they've actually hosted baby showers for some of the residents who live in the home. And baby showers might be with the dolls, but they actually hold baby showers, and you contribute to living in a community that way. You can see again the family style dining table on the slide on the right. You can see a fridge that's accessible for people to be able to take something in to sit down and enjoy that by themselves or with a friend or with a family member. And next slide. And this is just wonderful. This is something Christine has contributed from Responsive. This is a lovely resident designed interactive art that they've done on the wall. So the residents that live in this particular home in this particular area have created, it's really tactile, it's touchable, it's different, it's unique, and residents contributed to creating this particular mural, and then the tactile, the stones and the glass and the flowers on this wall. I just think this is absolutely brilliant, and what a lovely opportunity for residents to contribute to their to the area that they call home. Next slide. Again, meaningful engagement. So I mentioned that we prepare our own food. So typically we have certain times of the day where we cut our vegetables, and we actually have to do that because we have to get that evening meal served, that supper meal served. So those vegetables have to be peeled, the potatoes have to be cut, the squash has to be prepared, and we have our residents participating in that, and you want to do that. Preparation of food and meals is such an important part of and has great meaning to our lives. And so residents contribute and are part of that. Again, when I referenced earlier the resident that said to me, you know, I feel like I'm at McDonald's every day. She wants to be part of preparing her food. She wants to be part of serving that to her to her family in the community. And next slide, please. Again, more meaningful engagement. People just walk, you can walk together, you can clean, you can, you know, do art, whatever you want. You see the staff member on the right with the purple wall. It looks like dressed in a bathrobe. So again, there's no uniforms. That's part of the process. They're taken away, and you wear nightwear at night. Our staff that work nights and are part of the family at night wear their wear nightwear at night, because again, residents coming out of their rooms, if they're looking for someone, if you've got a lot of keys and, you know, official uniform on, and, you know, a lot of things that, you know, make noise, you know, phones and buzzers and bells and things like that, it can be pretty frightening. Next slide, please. Keeping busy. So, you know, one particular resident is cleaning. I had a resident that wanted to iron, and I'll tell you, the biggest mistake I made was we cut the cord off the iron, and she took the iron and she threw it behind her. She picked it up and threw it backwards over her shoulder, and it went through a plate glass window. All she needed was that iron to be hot so she could iron. And so we got her an iron that we could plug in. Again, we were trying to manage risk, and the iron's hot, and to this day, she's not burned herself. She needs to iron. When we took that, when we thought we could manage that risk for her, she put that iron with the cord cut off through the plate glass window, smashed the big window. Someone's helping with hair, someone's doing cleaning. It's the natural activities of our day that and part of living that form our day, that actually contribute to what our day looks like. And next slide. So you've got nice small areas again. You see some pets there. You see some residents sitting together. Someone's reading, someone's playing with the dog. You see the baskets on the shelf. Those baskets are full of the stuff of life that means something to each individual resident. They can go to their basket and take out those things that are of importance to them and meaning to them. Next slide. And there's our friend playing tennis down the hall. He wanted to play tennis. Well, why not? And you can see behind him all the photos on the wall, the frames on the wall. Those are all the staff members. Again, you know, we have photos in our and pictures up on the wall in our own homes, and it's about our staff's lives, not about what they do in the home or who they are or what their designation is, but it's about them. Helps connect us as a family together. And here's another resident. This is a lovely photo. It looks like she's playing the organ there. And the next slide. So why the bright paint colors? You can see the color behind me, this bright sort of autumn colored orange. Why the bright paint colors? And wow, they're loud. And I know when we started painting Temiskaming Lodge here, this full butterfly home, David Jarlett said to me, Jill, he would text me photos, and he would say, are you sure this is really what you want? Is this really what you're doing here? And it's a little bit difficult till you see it all come together, but man, does it ever make an impact when it comes together. Why are the colors so loud? Well, for those who don't have dementia and aging eye, you need to see color 5 to 8 times deeper than what you or I would see. So what I always say is you go to the paint store, you get the paint chit from Benjamin Moore, whoever you use, and you count down 5 to 8 colors. And that's where you land on the depth of color. So if you have dementia or aging eyesight, that's where you will see color. So when you think about beige, you don't just see beige, you see just a sea of washout. But you get into these deep colors, you know where you see it, first of all, and you can identify particular areas. Dementia will affect everything that the brain does, including the ability to see. So the paint colors is one of the ways we support residents to live better. And I've actually seen residents find their way with the color and not go beyond the color. I watched for an entire day a particular resident in a home. She lived in the pink section of the home area. And it was almost like a natural, I don't want to use the term restraint, but it sort of kept her there. She knew she needed to be in the pink and it was important for her to be in the pink. And nobody had to tell her to be in the pink. She just knew that pink was her place to be. So next slide, please. So the use of color is a cheerful way to support people living with dementia or others. If you know your room is green or the dining room is orange, you can find it on your own. Color makes a place feel more like home. And it's used for particular reasons. So yellow stimulates appetite, red increases energy, blue and green are common and often used in places where people need much less stimulation, such as a space where somebody with more advanced dementia would live. And green, interestingly enough, is the color that is last to be seen by the eye and as vision decreases. And so we do use green a lot and different depths of green and shades of green. So next slide, please.
Thanks, Jill.
Please, thank you, Julie.
This is one of my favorite quotes by Christine Bryden. If you're familiar with her work, she is a person who is living with dementia that has spoken so eloquently and frequently about how important it is to connect with people on an emotional level. A key aspect for person-centered care to support meaningful quality of life. A key aspect of person-centered care is to support a meaningful quality of life for the people who live in long-term care homes and ensuring that they have an opportunity to find joy, meaning, and purpose, feel valued and loved, care and feel cared for, have something to look forward to every day. Like, it really matters if it matters to the people around them when they get up out of bed every morning and walk into the world, and form meaningful relationships and connections. Next slide, please. So we wanted to share a little bit about how we determine whether we're meeting the mark of person-centered care, and want to talk a little bit about how we understand and measure what it looks, sounds, and feels like. So one way to assess whether or not a care environment is person-centered is to observe the lived experience of the people who are living within the home. Meaningful Care Matters uses a validated observation tool called Quality of Interaction Schedule to evaluate and understand the lived experience of people in long-term care homes. This is a validated tool, and it's a part of the evaluation process to determine whether or not a home has achieved the standard of an accredited butterfly home. So sometimes referred to as the QUIS tool, the QUIS tool measures quality of interactions between people who are living in the home over 5-minute periods of time and rating them according to the 5 types of care. Next slide, please. Taking a closer look at the 5 types of care, an observer will sit in the home and spend time observing the common areas such as dining rooms or lounges, and observations typically last somewhere between 5 and 6 hours. The observer will watch, listen, and learn to understand what it feels like to live in the home. The observation will break down the day into those 5-minute periods and score each period based on what type of care is being experienced by the majority of residents during that time. Looking at the 5 types of care, we have meaningful engagement, which is evidence of connection, sharing, and meaningful relationships. This is the most desirable type. Positive care, which has good attention to needs, care, and autonomy, but is limited in the social interaction. Neutral care, this is the main experience of boredom and lacks autonomy, and is for most people who do their first baseline audit, this would be the majority of the experiences that an observer might see. And the goal, of course, is to move it more towards positive and meaningful engagement. And then the two types of care that we do not want to see, controlling protective care. This is where staff make decisions about what is best for the resident, believing that it would be in the resident's best interest. And then controlling restrictive care, which is, you know, on the threshold of abuse. This type of care is embedded in the culture, needs are ignored, and movement is restricted. And this would, of course, be the least desirable type of care. So let's talk a little bit about what this might look like in practice and break it down more specifically. So in meaningful engagement, people are sitting together, they're preparing vegetables for a meal and discussing what's for lunch. In positive care, a snack is being served, residents are offered a visual choice of chocolate chip cookies or maybe an apple, and they're given time to make a decision, but there's no meaningful conversation happening, so their interests are being respected. In neutral care, people are sitting in front of a television for an hour with their eyes closed and not engaged with what is happening around them. Under controlling protective care, a staff person tells a resident who asks for a snack to wait until lunchtime so that they don't spoil their appetite. And of course, the worst type of care, controlling restrictive care, is where a resident with loud vocalizations is placed in a lounge by themselves with the door closed, and they're unable to open that door for themselves. Understanding the quiz tool is a really important component of butterfly training. And in the next 2 rounds of the webinars, we will be talking more about this and sharing a bit of our experience in bringing our staff and teams on board. Next slide, please. We just wanted to take one moment, and of course, I think we'll talk more about this in the upcoming webinars. But a huge part of the success is inspiring butterfly workers in our homes and really helping them to understand how critical the role is that they play. We cannot be successful in implementing person-centered care if we don't focus on this part. So self-reflection and development is a focus of training for staff. It's easy for people who are working in long-term care to say, oh, I'm definitely person-centered, or to feel like they're already butterflies. But reflecting on what this actually means gives a greater understanding to where improvement may be needed. So a butterfly worker takes the time to connect. They know how to change a moment. They might use their clothing or what they know about the resident to ensure that they're cared for. They make meal times meaningful. They understand that meals are a really important part of the day. It's not a task, it's an opportunity, and they take advantage of that and offer independence. They take the time to be with people. They know that they're free to stop and stay with someone to have a cup of coffee, and they make sure that that's a regular part of the day. A butterfly worker focuses on the feelings. They recognize that their actions and reactions of people living with dementia are connected to the feelings and comfort, and they provide support when needed. And ultimately, they recognize that a whole team approach is essential. No single butterfly can do it all. We are all members of the team and play an important role in helping to make home truly feel like home. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Julie. And we're coming to the end of our first session about what is the butterfly approach. Julie, I think you landed on the biggest piece that we'll talk about in part 2, how you implement butterfly. How do you affect that culture change and unleash that humanity and enable your team members to bring their full selves and mindfulness to the workplace? There are 2 questions in the chat just now, and I'm going to go to those. If anyone else has a question, please put it into the chat. And as Shirley mentioned at the beginning, our hosts, we are available to stay a little bit longer if you are able to do so as well. Any more technical questions? We do have the email address here in this deck, and this webinar will be posted on our websites for access, so keep that in mind. The first question we have is from Dana Garner. Does the care team still continue to take breaks outside of their care routines? So I'm going to suggest yes. In our homes, our care team members continue to take their breaks. In one of our homes, we had a situation where breaks were concentrated around the lunch, 1 hour full break, and through the butterfly transformation, we broke up those break times throughout the shift so we could be more resident-centered. But Jill, Julie, any additional comments on this question?
I would say yes, absolutely. Staff continue to take their breaks. I think it's important for staff to be able to step away, and I think it's for their own health as well to take a moment to refresh and um, take some time for themselves. So they absolutely take their breaks. The way they're scheduled is a little bit different. So as Christina mentioned, it's not around those particular times when it's important for them to be with their residents, and that's the meal time. So at meal times, our staff would sit with the residents during the meal. Again, have a cup of coffee, cup of tea, that sort of thing. But they would continue to have their own meal break that would be taken off the particular home area.
Thank you. Next question from an anonymous attendee. Can you explain what your monthly calendar would look like? I understand the butterfly model is more open, but it's a requirement to provide a monthly calendar to the residents. So we do have some scheduled activities, but Butterfly is about transforming every moment. It's recreation doesn't exist so much as a word, but perhaps Julie or Jill, would you like to share more about this?
Yeah, I would just agree with you, Christina. It's not about having one over the other. It's about both. Like our own lives, we have scheduled activities that we attend to on any given day and special events, but we also have really awesome moments that are not planned and are part of the natural part of our lives. We want that same experience to happen for residents in our home. We want them to have both planned and scheduled things to look forward to, as well as spontaneous and awesome things that are not planned or scheduled.
And I would say the same thing, where we would have a general events calendar, I would say maybe for that particular month that might have a barbecue planned or an outing planned or something like that, but not a specific home area calendar. We actually eliminated those, and I'm not aware that that's a requirement that every home area has a specific calendar. And I would just reference again that, again, we have special events, we have all sorts of, things that we all participate in and that the whole home would participate in. But I would just say again that the rhythm of the day is the calendar. So really the residents drive what, and individuals drive, small groups might drive what's happening for that particular day. If I want to get my boots and my coat on and go outside and it's December and it's snowing, I want to do that versus go to something at 10 o'clock that's in an auditorium, for example. So we've eliminated the individual calendars and have more of a general events calendar.
Thank you. And I think part 2, when we meet again, if you can join us in November, we'll talk about that implementation journey and how you kind of unhinge from some of those protocols and structures that we're so used to. The next 2 questions are similar. They have to do, one is anonymous. Do you have concerns with IPAC with the model? The second is from Brianna Martin. I'm wondering how infection control is maintained with so many items around the home. It all looks so beautiful, but I see so many items that have to be cleaned. So for sure in part 2, we'll address this more. I can assure you from our perspective, each of our team members in the home area actually takes on a responsibility around IPAC. And we have very clear protocols around maintaining the stuff of life. So look forward to digging in more, but for sure, this is an area we manage carefully. Jill, Julie?
Well, I will certainly in part 2, I have a slide that speaks directly to IPAC, but when you're living as a family in smaller households or in a household, there's non-rotation of staff. And you have dedicated staff to those, again, they're family members, they're called family members, dedicated. You don't have that mixing of staff, so that opportunity for transmission to occur. And if you look at what happened through COVID, interestingly, the butterfly homes that had butterfly households or butterfly homes actually fared better. So people living together and sticking together and staying together and sort of less interaction. In terms of the stuff of life, again, similar to Christina, we have a protocol for how we manage the cleaning and the care, but we've got fewer fingers touching things. And when you live as a family, no different than your own family, you tend to not have that sort of widespread transmission. Julie?
Yeah, I would just say I agree with everything that's been stated. If I were a home that was looking at bringing on culture change, I would bring our person who's responsible for IPAC along with me from day one. Have these important conversations. At the end of the day, IPAC is here to help ensure that residents live well and live safely, and they can't do that if their quality of life is diminished. And truthfully, all of the things that may be worrying you about sort of how are we going to keep all of these things clean, that problem is there whether you do Butterfly or not, because we know that every resident has items in their own bedrooms, as well as in other places where you're addressing the same problem anyway. So it sounds like we should really focus on this in our next webinar series. And this is a topic that every Butterfly loves to dig into. So I think we should do that.
Very good. Two more questions here. One is, can you just apply the model without accreditation? And I'm going to come right out and say, no, you cannot implement the Butterfly approach without going through the formal process with Meaningful Care Matters. It is a very deep culture transformation, and unleashing that humanity is a very particular process. There's no task list that will tick and bob you through this. This is an emotional experience. If you do want to go on the journey with Meaningful Care Matters and then forego the accreditation, that might be a different story. But Jill, Julie, again, any comments to add?
Well, I think I would say, calls that I get from people saying, could you share your paint schedule? I'm going to paint our walls in these colors and sequences, and I'm going to get some door wraps put up. That's not Butterfly. That's environmental changes that support residents living well and staff working well, but that's not Butterfly. You are Butterfly. It's the verb to be, right? You are Butterfly, and that requires that very deep, intentional, minimum year-long culture change work. Staff are minimum 2 days a month. I don't want to get into implementation here, at training. And it's not just training. It's really around opening yourself up and being able to feel and engaging with others in a relational way versus in a task-based or routinized way. So, I'm always happy to share that my paint schedule. You go ahead and paint because I think it's great, but that doesn't make you Butterfly. So I would agree with Christina that it's the culture change that's more important. And I think, not that I've done this, but I think, we probably could forgo some of the environmental changes and be successful with Butterfly in terms of being with our residents. But you can't not do that culture change and just do those environmental things and expect to be experience that culture change. It's an experience. And Julie, any comments on that?
No, I think you covered it well.
Very good. And I know the last question is very much about part two. How do you go about implementing Butterfly? Do you have external partners helping you? Do you engage your own team leaders? I think I'm going to defer that to part two. It is a combination the first time, but you want to build the expertise internally. And Meaningful Care Matters, they want organizations to become self-sustaining. So it's a deliberate part of their approach. Shirley, I think we're getting close to our time. I'm going to transition back to yourself. And Helen, thank you for the last slide.
Sure. Thank you so much, Christina. And so just in closing today, I really want to express my thanks to everyone who has participated in this session and joined, and especially thank you to Jill and Julie and Christina for all of the great work that has gone into this presentation. The information has been incredibly informative, very powerful messaging, very powerful slides. that truly demonstrate the value of connecting and meaningful engagements. So we do look forward to the upcoming sessions. November 15th is the next one at the same time, and then followed by February 7th. So a lot to this model. We really appreciate everyone's time. And again, thank you to Jill and Julie and Christina for your time and sharing this and your experiences with us.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.